The next term I want to talk to you about is genre, G-E-N-R-E. Please say it correctly, genre. And a genre is really like a category, so a particular genre of literature, a genre of poetry. It sounds much more impressive than the literal translation of it. Okay, illusion, I-L-L-U-S-I-O-N. Your students will get this mixed up with illusion, and you want to make sure that you let them know the difference. An illusion is when you think you see something that's not really there. So that's an easy thing to do. One of the things that's involved sometimes in illusion is a willing suspension of disbelief. And that means, and this is something you're going to need to teach your students anyway, the suspension of disbelief, where you have to just step outside the story and say, I don't care if this could really happen or not. For right now, I'm going to read the text as if I believe it. And that's really important for you to teach your students, because if they can't do that, sometimes they'll decide something is so, in their terms, stupid that they won't allow themselves to understand what's happening. Okay, imagery. There are all sorts of imagery, and what you're talking about here is language that helps you paint a picture in your head. It may use a lot of figurative language, a lot of different literary elements to create that, but imagery is the picture inside your head. Irony. Oh, irony is so much fun to teach your students. Basically, there are three kinds of irony. There is dramatic irony, where you as the reader or the audience know something that the characters in the story do not know. And then there's situational irony, where you think one thing is going to happen and then something else happens instead. And then there is verbal irony, where you say one thing and mean another. And they are masters at verbal irony. You could let them play with some of that, like when you say, oh, he is all that. What does all that mean? Well, you can use it one way and it means he's really hot, or you can use it another way and it means he's not at all what he thinks he is. Motif, M-O-T-I-F, is another term that's used very frequently in drama, and it's a recurring theme. It's not as heavy as the theme of this or that, but it's a little something that keeps happening. For example, in The Death of a Salesman, what's his name? Willy Loman keeps referring to the stockings that he buys, hosiery, for this lady. So it's something that just happens repeatedly until finally you think, okay, that's got to mean something. Just tearing off more little tabs all along. Onomatopoeia, that was that poetic device I told you about, where the sound of the word, the way it's spelled, imitates its sound. You see that in comic books all the time. Oxymoron. Oh, I love oxymorons. That's a contradictory phrase. So if I said, would you hand me those plastic glasses over there? Well, if it's plastic, it's not made of glass. Our whole vocabulary and our phraseology is full of oxymorons. Okay, I have a lot of notes on this. Let me see what I'm trying to say here. Oh, plot. Well, what can we say about plot? Can't have a story without plot. But there is a structure to plot that you need to be able to recognize. It starts with your setting, and sometimes setting is crucial to the plot, and sometimes setting is just a place where it happens. It's always going to have time and place. The time may be modern day, or it may be specifically stated 1876 or whatever, but there will be a time involved in the setting. And then a place. Is it in a made-up world, or is it any little town in USA? Sometimes the author does not always tell you where this happens, but there will be a time and there will be a place. It could be very specific or it could be very general. So we start off with a setting, and then we have rising action, which is moving us toward the climax. And the rising action will be a series of things that are impeding the progress of the protagonist to the goal that the protagonist has set. Then the climax, which could be something very dramatic or something very subtle, and then falling action, and that's how the story kind of plays out. The denouement may be in there, and finally you get to the resolution or the denouement, kind of, depending on how long the story goes from the climax to the end. Now, in a good story, that's not going to be a very long time, because once you've reached the most important part of the story, and you can kind of figure out what's going to happen from that point on, and so you don't need it stretched over chapters and chapters and chapters and chapters to get to the final piece of the story. Point of view. Point of view involves the person from which the story is told. For example, if it's first person, then the narrator is telling the story. There's one story that I think it was In Country, I'm not really sure, that uses a lot of second person, which is a little bit awkward because the author uses the word you. I see this in some more of the young adult literature, as if the author is talking directly to the reader. Sometimes it works really well, and other times it's kind of distracting for me, but that's a new thing that's coming into play. And then third person, when you have all the third person pronouns, he, she, they, and whoever is telling the story is definitely outside of the story. Then you have omniscient viewpoint, and you have limited omniscience. So if you have first person narrator telling the story, they're telling it to you through a limited omniscient viewpoint, because they're telling you what they know, but not what all the other characters know. And then if it's omniscient, that means that you know everything that's in the head of everyone else. That's a very unusual technique. The book that I'm taking these notes from says there's only one story, and I can't remember who the author was, that told 3 stories from stream of conscious viewpoint, where everything in that character's head is coming out on the paper. Those are difficult to read as well. And you had all 3 characters doing that, so that you knew everything those 3 characters knew. So that would be omniscient. Most stories are going to be limited omniscient because it's a very economical way to get the story told. And they'll be either first person, the narrator is telling the story, or third person. That also brings up the point of an unreliable narrator. Our students are so used to saying, well, something is in print, so it's true, and that's not the case. Think about the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Huck is a rascal, and he's telling the story, and you know that half of what he's telling you is either lies or exaggerated. He's very unreliable. In I Am the Cheese, I can't remember the main character's name, but he's unreliable. You find out along toward the end that he has mental problems, and so how much of what he's been telling you has been actual fact. That's the crux of the story. Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield is a troubled young man, and so he's telling this story in such a roundabout way and telling it from his viewpoint, which is certainly warped. So teach your students not to just accept that the narrator is telling the story as if it's true without questioning whether or not that narrator is reliable or unreliable. That also helps them buy into the story and engage in it a little bit better. 2 more. This first one really is more of a pet peeve than a literary term for me, but the word is précis, and that's a very short summary. Sometimes it's limited. There's a space limit. I can't think of the word, but anyway, it has to be either 1/4 or 1/3 of the text that it's summarizing. But it's French, P-R-E-C-I-S, with an accent over the E, and it's pronounced précis. And then the last term for this little section is preface. Not preface, but preface, and that's something that comes at the beginning of a work to help set up the story for the reader.